The leather reins slipped through Clara Coleman's fingers as her wagon wheel shattered against the rock, sending her tumbling sideways into the dust of the Colorado Territory Trail. And for a moment, she could only lie there gasping while her scattered belongings rolled down the embankment toward the Arkansas River below. It was August of 1876, and the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the landscape around Loveland, transforming the rocky terrain into a shimmering haze. Clara pushed herself up on trembling arms, tasting copper and dirt, her cotton dress torn at the shoulder where it had caught on something sharp during the fall. The wagon listed dangerously to one side, its front left wheel nothing but splintered wood and bent iron. Her horse, a gentle mare named Bess, whinnied nervously but seemed unharmed, still attached to the ruined wagon by her traces. Clara stood slowly, assessing the damage with a sinking heart. Everything she owned was either in that wagon or scattered across 50 yards of Colorado dirt. A trunk had burst open, spilling her mother's quilts and her father's books. A crate of preserves had smashed, painting the rocks with strawberry jam. Her sewing basket had overturned, though that hardly mattered given her complete inability to use its contents properly. She was alone on a road that saw maybe 3 travelers a week, miles from town in either direction, with the sun already beginning its descent toward the mountains. Clara fought back the panic rising in her throat. She had survived worse than this. She had survived the fever that took her parents in Missouri. She had survived the riverboat journey west. She had survived 3 weeks of traveling alone because she refused to marry Martin Weatherby, the banker's son her uncle had chosen for her. But surviving this particular disaster seemed to require skills she did not possess. Clara was attempting to calm Bess when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching. She spun around, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was out here. A single woman alone on a remote road was an invitation for trouble, and she had heard enough stories about bandits and worse to make her blood run cold. The rider who came around the bend was not what she expected. He sat tall in the saddle on a paint horse, wearing a dusty brown Stetson and work clothes that had seen better days. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that touched his collar, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. He pulled his horse to a stop and surveyed the scene with intelligent hazel eyes that took in everything at once: the broken wagon, the scattered belongings, Clara's torn dress and scraped hands, and the fact that she was utterly alone. "You hurt, miss." His voice was deep and careful, the kind of voice that thought before it spoke. "No," Clara said, then amended. "Not badly, anyway. Just some scrapes. But my wagon is beyond repair, I think." He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot. He walked to the wagon and crouched down to examine the broken wheel, running his hands over the damage with practiced efficiency. "You are right about that," he said finally. "This wheel is gone. The axle is cracked too. You would need a blacksmith and a wheelwright both, and even then it might not be worth saving." He stood and removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ethan Oakes, madam. I have a ranch about 2 miles north of here. Clara Coleman." She tried to smooth her hair, realized how ridiculous that was given her current state, and let her hands drop. "I was heading to Loveland. I have a position there, teaching at the school starting in September." Ethan looked at the sun, then back at her with an expression that was both sympathetic and practical. "You are not going to make it to Loveland tonight, Miss Coleman, not without a wagon and not with all these belongings. The town is still a good 8 miles east, and you would be walking in the dark within 2 hours." Clara felt her stomach twist. She knew he was right, but accepting help from a stranger went against every warning she had ever been given. Still, what choice did she have? She could not stay here on the road, and she could not walk to town in the dark carrying everything she owned. "I have a proposition," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "My ranch is close. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow I will take you into Loveland with whatever belongings we can salvage. My housekeeper, Mrs. Gilbert, lives on the property. She will make sure everything is proper and respectable." Clara studied his face, trying to assess his character in the way her mother had taught her. "Look at the eyes," her mother had always said. "Honest eyes do not shift and do not calculate." Ethan Oakes met her gaze steadily, waiting for her answer without pressure or impatience. There was something solid about him, something that reminded her of the old oak tree that had stood in her childhood yard, immovable and reliable. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Mr. Oakes. I accept your help." They spent the next hour gathering her scattered belongings. Ethan worked without complaint, climbing down the embankment to retrieve books and clothing that had tumbled into the brush. He handled her things with respect, carefully folding garments and stacking books as if they were treasures, not the meager possessions of a stranded schoolteacher. Clara found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noting the way he moved with purpose and the careful consideration he gave to each task. By the time they had collected everything salvageable, the sun was noticeably lower. Ethan unhitched Bess from the ruined wagon, then loaded Clara's trunk and bags onto his own horse with practiced efficiency. He fashioned a lead rope for Bess and helped Clara mount the mare before swinging up onto his paint horse. "What about the wagon?" Clara asked, looking back at the sad wreckage. "I will come back for it tomorrow with my men. We can use the wood for something, even if the wagon itself is past saving. Out here, nothing goes to waste." They rode north, leaving the main road for a narrower trail that wound through stands of cottonwood and past rocky outcroppings. Clara had never been particularly skilled on horseback, but Bess was calm and patient, following Ethan's paint horse without fuss. The landscape around them was beautiful in a harsh way, all red rock and stubborn grass, with the mountains rising purple in the distance. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in the cooling air. "How long have you had your ranch?" Clara asked, wanting to fill the silence that had stretched between them. 5 years come October. I bought the land with money I saved working cattle drives up from Texas. It is not the biggest spread, but it is mine. I run about 200 head of cattle and breed horses on the side. The paint here Apache, he is from my own stock. Apache is a fine horse, Clara said, meaning it. The paint moved with a smooth gait that spoke of good breeding and better training. He is my best. His colts sell well to the cavalry and to ranchers who know quality when they see it. Ethan glanced back at her. "What brought you out west, Miss Coleman? Missouri is a long way from Colorado territory." Clara hesitated, then decided on partial truth. "My parents died last year. I had no other family except an uncle who had very definite ideas about my future. I wanted to make my own way, and the school board in Loveland was desperate enough for a teacher that they offered me the position sight unseen. That took courage, or foolishness. The jury is still out." Ethan laughed, a warm sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Well, you made it all the way to Colorado. That is more than foolish young women do. That is determination." The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise. It was not grand, but it was well kept and obviously cared for. The main house was built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. A barn stood to the left, large and sturdy, and Clara could see a bunkhouse beyond it, along with various corrals and outbuildings. Chickens scratched in a yard enclosed by neat fencing, and a garden grew beside the house, rows of vegetables thriving despite the dry climate. A woman emerged from the house as they approached. She was perhaps 60 years old, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that might have been carved from granite. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and she stood with her hands on her hips, watching them ride up with evident curiosity. "Mrs. Gilbert," Ethan called as they dismounted. "This is Miss Clara Coleman. She had trouble on the road, and I have offered her our hospitality for the night." Mrs. Gilbert's expression softened slightly as she took in Clara's disheveled appearance. "Lord have mercy, girl, you look like you have been dragged behind that horse, not riding on it. Come inside and let me see to those scrapes." Before Clara could protest, she found herself being ushered into the house while Ethan saw to the horses. The interior of the ranch house was as neat and well-maintained as the exterior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table surrounded by chairs in the center. Stairs led to what Clara assumed were bedrooms above. Everything was clean and functional, if not fancy. Mrs. Gilbert sat Clara down at the table and brought a basin of water and clean cloths. She tended to Clara's scraped palms and the cut on her shoulder with efficient gentleness, clicking her tongue at the state of Clara's dress. "This tear is going to need mending," the older woman said, examining the ripped shoulder seam. "Do you have a sewing kit in your things?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I do, but it will not help much. I cannot sew. My mother tried to teach me for years, but my stitches always came out crooked and loose. I am afraid domestic skills were never my strength." Mrs. Gilbert smiled, the expression transforming her stern face into something almost kind. "Well, we all have our talents. What are yours, then?" "I can read Latin and Greek. I know mathematics through calculus. I can recite poetry and name every bone in the human body." Clara heard the defensiveness in her own voice and tried to soften it. "I suppose those things do not help much when your dress is torn, though." "They will help plenty when you are standing in front of a classroom full of children who need educating," Mrs. Gilbert said firmly. "Loveland is lucky to have you, I would say. Now, let me see what I can do about this dress. It will not be my finest work, but it will hold together." Ethan came in as Mrs. Gilbert was threading a needle. He had removed his hat and washed up at the pump outside, and his hair was damp and pushed back from his face. Clara was struck again by how handsome he was in a rugged, unassuming way. He was not the kind of man who would turn heads in a ballroom, but out here in this wild country, he seemed perfectly suited to his surroundings. "Your horse is settled in the barn with fresh hay and water," he told Clara. "She seems sound. No injuries from the accident. Thank you, Mr. Oakes." "You have been very kind," he shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. "It is what any decent person would do. You cannot leave someone stranded on the road." Mrs. Gilbert handed Clara the dress, now mended with small, even stitches that were nearly invisible. "Here you are, dear. There is a room upstairs, first door on the right, where you can change and rest before dinner. Ethan, show her up and bring down her trunk so she can find a clean dress if she has one." Clara followed Ethan up the narrow stairs, acutely aware of him moving just ahead of her. The room Mrs. Gilbert had indicated was small but clean, with a single bed covered in a simple quilt, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out over the ranch yard toward the mountains beyond. "This is lovely," Clara said honestly. "Thank you." Ethan set her trunk down by the bed. "It is not much, but it is comfortable enough. Mrs. Gilbert keeps everything spotless." He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "Miss Coleman, I hope you do not think I had any improper intentions in bringing you here. With Mrs. Gilbert on the property, your reputation should be safe enough." "I know," Clara said. "And please call me Clara. After you have rescued me from the side of the road and gathered up my undergarments from the bushes, I think we can dispense with excessive formality." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, lighting up his eyes with warmth. "Then you should call me Ethan. I will leave you to freshen up. Dinner is usually around 7. After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. The events of the day crashed over her all at once. The terror of the accident, the vulnerability of being stranded, the relief of rescue, and now the strange intimacy of being in this house with these people she had known for mere hours. She felt untethered, as if the broken wagon wheel had severed not just her transportation but her careful plans for her new life. But as Clara looked around the simple room with its clean sheets and the view of mountains turning gold in the evening light, she felt something else too. A sense of possibility, perhaps, or the first stirring of something she could not yet name. She changed into her best dress, a dark blue cotton with small white flowers that her mother had made for her last birthday. It fit well enough, though Clara had lost weight during her journey west and the waist was looser than it had been. She brushed out her hair, which was dark brown and fell in waves past her shoulders, and pinned it up as neatly as she could manage without a mirror. Her face was sun-browned from weeks of travel, which would have horrified the ladies back in Missouri, but Clara found she did not care. Out here, practicality seemed to matter more than fashion. When she came downstairs, she found the table set for 3. Mrs. Gilbert was putting out plates of food, a roast of some kind, potatoes, beans, fresh bread. The smells made Clara's stomach growl, reminding her that she had eaten nothing since a hasty breakfast of jerky and hard biscuits that morning. Ethan stood by the fireplace, talking quietly with another man Clara had not seen before. This man was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and the bow-legged stance of someone who had spent a lifetime in the saddle. He wore range clothes similar to Ethan's and had the weathered look of a career cattleman. "Clara," Ethan said as she approached, "this is Jack Morris, my foreman. Jack, Miss Clara Coleman, the new school teacher for Loveland." Jack touched his hat respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Sorry to hear about your trouble on the road." "Thank you, Mr. Morris. I am grateful your employer was passing by when he was. Ethan has a habit of being in the right place at the right time," Jack said with obvious affection. "It is one of his more annoying qualities." They sat down to dinner, and Clara discovered she was ravenously hungry. The food was simple but well prepared, and she ate with an appetite that might have been considered unladylike back home, but which no one at the table seemed to notice or care about. The conversation flowed easily, touching on ranch business, the weather, news from town, and the upcoming roundup that would occupy everyone's attention in a few weeks. "Will you have help for the roundup?" Clara asked, surprising herself with her interest. "We will bring on a few extra hands," Ethan explained. "Jack here will do most of the organizing. I have 6 men who work the ranch full-time, and we will probably hire 4 or 5 more for the roundup. It is hard work, but necessary. We have to gather the cattle, separate out those ready for market, brand the new calves, check the whole herd for injuries or illness. It sounds complicated." "It is," Jack said, "but we have been doing it long enough that it goes smoothly most years. Well, smoothly as these things go. There is always something that goes wrong. Last year we had a bull get loose and lead half the men on a chase halfway to Denver. Year before that, we lost a whole week to rain that turned everything into mud. This year will be different," Ethan said with mock solemnity. "This year everything will go perfectly." Jack snorted. "Right. and I am going to sprout wings and fly to Mexico for the winter." Their easy banter made Clara smile. There was genuine friendship between the two men, the kind that came from years of working side by side through good times and bad. She found herself envying that connection, that sense of belonging somewhere and to someone. After dinner, Mrs. Gilbert shooed them all out of the kitchen so she could clean up. Clara offered to help, but the older woman would hear none of it. "You are a guest tonight, dear. Tomorrow, when you are settled in town, you can do your own dishes to your heart's content. Tonight, you rest." Ethan invited Clara out to the porch, where the evening air was finally beginning to cool. The sun had set, leaving the sky streaked with orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. The ranch stretched out before them, peaceful in the gathering darkness. Clara could hear cattle lowing in the distance and the chirp of crickets in the grass. They sat in rocking chairs that faced the western vista, and for a while neither spoke. Clara was learning that Ethan was comfortable with silence, that he did not feel the need to fill every moment with words. It was a quality she appreciated, having known too many people who talked simply to hear themselves speak. "It is beautiful here," Clara said finally. "Harsh, but beautiful. It is. I grew up in Ohio, and when I first came west, I thought I would hate it. Everything seemed too big, too empty, too unforgiving. But it gets into your blood somehow. Now when I go back east to buy stock or equipment, everything feels too crowded, too tame. This land demands respect, but if you give it that respect, it gives something back. A sense of freedom, maybe. Room to breathe. I think I understand that. Back in Missouri, everything felt so constrained. There were rules for everything, expectations about who I should be and what I should do. Out here, it seems like there is more room to simply exist as you are." Ethan turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "Is that why you ran away? Too many expectations?" Clara was surprised he had guessed so accurately. "Partly. My uncle wanted me to marry a man I could not stand. A banker's son who saw me as a useful acquisition, like a good horse or a profitable property. When I refused, my uncle threatened to stop supporting me entirely, so I found my own way. That takes courage," Ethan said quietly, "and strength. A lot of women would have just accepted what they were told was their duty. Maybe I should have. Maybe I am being foolishly stubborn, but I could not do it. I could not spend the rest of my life pretending to be something I am not, trying to be the kind of wife Martin Weatherby wanted." Clara paused, then added with brutal honesty, "I could not imagine letting him touch me." The words hung in the air between them, more intimate than Clara had intended. She felt heat rise to her face, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "Then you made the right choice," Ethan said firmly. "Life is too short and too hard to spend it with someone who makes your skin crawl. You deserve better than that." They sat in silence for a while longer, rocking gently, watching the stars multiply in the darkening sky. Clara felt a strange peace settle over her, a sense that despite the disaster of her broken wagon and delayed arrival in Loveland, she was exactly where she needed to be in this moment. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Of course. Is there a Mrs. Oakes?" "I do not mean to pry, but I realized I do not know if you are married or if your wife is simply away at the moment." Ethan's rocking chair creaked as he shifted. "No Mrs. Oakes. There was someone back in Ohio, but she did not want to come west. She wanted a settled life, a house in town, neighbors close by. I wanted this." He gestured at the darkened landscape. "We wanted different things, so we went different ways. That was 6 years ago now. Do you regret it?" "No, I regret hurting her, but I do not regret the choice. We would have made each other miserable if we had married. She wanted me to be someone I was not, and I would have resented her for it eventually. Better to part ways as friends than grow to hate each other over years of disappointment. Clara nodded, understanding completely. That is exactly how I felt about Martin. Better to be alone than to be lonely in the company of the wrong person. Exactly. Ethan's voice was warm with approval. You understand, not everyone does. They talked until the stars filled the entire sky and Mrs. Gilbert came to the door to announce she was retiring for the night. Ethan showed Clara to her room again, bringing up a lamp and making sure she had everything she needed. We will head into Loveland around 9 tomorrow morning if that suits you, he said from the doorway. That will give you time to rest and have a proper breakfast. Mrs. Gilbert makes excellent pancakes. That sounds wonderful. Thank you again, Ethan, for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along. Someone else would have helped, he said, but his eyes were kind. Sleep well, Clara. But Clara found sleep elusive. She lay in the comfortable bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, her mind churning over the events of the day. She kept seeing Ethan's face. The way he had looked at her broken wagon with practical assessment, the careful way he had handled her belongings, the genuine interest in his eyes when he listened to her speak. She thought about his voice in the darkness, talking about freedom and courage and the right to choose your own path. Clara had not come west looking for romance. She had come looking for independence, for a life she could control and a future she could build with her own hands and mind. But lying there in the dark, listening to the wind in the cottonwoods and the distant yipping of coyotes, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might grow into love given time and opportunity. She fell asleep thinking about hazel eyes and work-roughened hands, and the way Ethan had said her name like it mattered. Morning came bright and clear, the sun streaming through the window to wake Clara earlier than she would have liked. She dressed in another simple dress, this one a faded green that had seen many washings, and made her way downstairs to find the house already bustling with activity. Mrs. Gilbert was indeed making pancakes, along with bacon and eggs, and the smell made Clara's mouth water. Ethan was already up and had apparently been working for hours. He came in from outside with dirt on his knees and hay in his hair, looking energized and content. He washed up at the kitchen pump and joined them at the table, eating with the hearty appetite of someone who had already burned off considerable energy. I sent a couple of the men to collect your wagon this morning, he told Clara between bites. They will bring back anything usable. The wagon itself we can break down for lumber. Hate to see good wood go to waste. You do not have to do that, Clara protested. You have already done so much. It is no trouble. The men can use the work, and like I said, we can use the materials. Nothing goes to waste out here if we can help it. After breakfast, Ethan hitched up a wagon much sturdier than Clara's had been and loaded her trunk and bags into the back. Mrs. Gilbert pressed a bundle of food into Clara's hands, enough for several meals, wrapped in a clean cloth. You will need something to eat until you get settled, the older woman said. And you come back any time you need anything, you hear. We are not so far from Loveland that you cannot visit. Clara felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the kindness. Thank you. You have been so generous. The ride into Loveland took about 2 hours, following the road Clara had been traveling when her wheel broke. In daylight and with Ethan's company, the journey seemed pleasant rather than daunting. The landscape rolled past, all golden grass and red rock, with the mountains always present on the horizon. They passed other ranches, small homesteads carved out of the wilderness, and once a group of riders heading in the opposite direction who waved and called greetings to Ethan. You know everyone, Clara observed. Small territory. Most of the ranchers around here know each other, at least by sight. We help each other out when needed. You cannot survive out here alone." As they traveled, Ethan told her more about the area. He pointed out landmarks, warned her about where flash floods sometimes made the road impassable, told her which ranchers were trustworthy and which to be wary of. Clara listened, filing away information that might be useful in her new life here. "The school is on the east side of town," Ethan explained. "The teacher before you lived in a room attached to the schoolhouse itself. I assume that is where you will be staying." "Yes. The school board said accommodation was included with the position. It will be basic, but the schoolhouse is solid. It was built about 3 years ago when the town decided it needed a proper school instead of lessons taught in the church basement. You will have maybe 20 students, ages 6 to 15, all in one room. The older boys can be trouble sometimes, especially during planting and harvest, when they would rather be working their family farms than sitting in a classroom." "I can handle trouble," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "I may not be able to sew, but I can teach." Loveland appeared gradually, first a few scattered buildings, then more clustered together, until they entered what could properly be called a town. It was not large, perhaps 1,000 residents at most, but it had the essential establishments of civilization. A general store, a church, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, a livery stable, a doctor's office, and various other shops and businesses. The buildings were mostly wood, weathered by sun and wind, with a few brick structures that spoke of more permanent ambitions. People on the street turned to look as they passed, curious about the newcomer. Ethan drove directly to the schoolhouse, which stood slightly apart from the main street. It was a simple wooden building painted white, with windows along both sides and a small bell tower on top. A modest garden had been planted around it, though the flowers looked thirsty in the August heat. Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon and unloaded her trunk. The door to the schoolhouse was unlocked, and inside Clara found exactly what she expected. Rows of desks and benches, a teacher's desk at the front, a chalkboard on the wall, and a stove in the corner for heat in winter. A door at the back led to a small room that would be her living quarters. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed, washstand, and small chest of drawers it contained. A single window looked out over the scrubby land behind the school. There was a hook on the wall for hanging clothes and a shelf for books. It was monastic in its simplicity, but it was clean and private, and it was hers. "Not much, is it?" Ethan said from the doorway, and Clara heard apology in his voice, as if he were somehow responsible for the Spartan accommodation. "It is perfect," Clara said honestly. "It is mine. My own space, my own life, my own choice. That makes it perfect." Ethan smiled. "I suppose that is one way to look at it." They spent the next hour unloading Clara's belongings and helping her settle in. Ethan proved handy at practical tasks, reinforcing a loose shelf and fixing a window that stuck. Clara unpacked her books, arranging them on the shelf with loving care. Her volumes of poetry, her mathematics texts, her mother's Bible, her father's medical journals. Each one was a treasure, a piece of her past she had carried into her future. When everything was unloaded and arranged to Clara's satisfaction, Ethan hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave but unsure what excuse he had to stay. "I should check in with the school board chairwoman while I am in town," Clara said. "Would you mind introducing me? I am sure you know who she is." Relief crossed Ethan's face. "Of course, that would be Mrs. Patricia Dalton. She runs the general store with her husband. We can walk there from here." They made their way back to the main street, and Clara was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. A strange woman arriving with Ethan Oakes was apparently news worth noting. Clara held her head high, refusing to show any discomfort at the attention. The general store was a large building that seemed to sell everything from nails to needles, from bacon to books. The proprietress, Mrs. Dalton, turned out to be a brisk woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and a businesslike manner. She looked Clara up and down with frank assessment. "So you are the new teacher," she said without preamble. "We were beginning to wonder if you would ever arrive. School starts in less than 2 weeks." "I apologize for the delay," Clara said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "I had difficulties on the road. My wagon broke down and Mr. Oakes was kind enough to assist me." Mrs. Dalton's sharp eyes moved between Clara and Ethan, clearly calculating. "I see. Well, you are here now, that is what matters. Can you read and write?" "Yes, madam." "I can also teach mathematics through geometry, basic science, history, geography, and Latin if any students show interest." "Latin?" Mrs. Dalton's eyebrows rose. "Fancy! Most of our children will be lucky if they can read the Bible and figure out how to make change. But I suppose it does not hurt to have an educated teacher. You start September 1st. Classes run Monday through Friday, 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. You get Saturdays, Sundays, and major holidays off. Your salary is $20 a month plus room and board. The room you have seen. For board, families will take turns providing you with meals, or you can cook for yourself if you prefer. $20 a month was not much, but it was more than Clara had ever earned before, and it was hers. "That is acceptable, Mrs. Dalton. Thank you. You can thank me by keeping those children educated and out of trouble for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a store to run." Dismissed, Clara and Ethan stepped back out into the sunshine. Clara felt a strange mix of excitement and terror settling over her. This was real. She was actually going to do this. In less than 2 weeks, she would stand in front of a room full of children and be responsible for their education. "You handled that well," Ethan said. "Mrs. Dalton is not an easy woman to impress." "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "You did not show it. That is a skill worth having out here." Ethan glanced down the street toward where his wagon waited. "I should be getting back to the ranch. Roundup preparations do not manage themselves. But Clara, if you need anything at all, you can get word to me. The ranch is not far and I come into town for supplies regularly." "Thank you, Ethan, for everything. I do not think I can ever repay your kindness." Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and hopeful. "Maybe you do not need to repay it. Maybe you could just let me come calling sometimes. If that would be all right with you." Clara's heart did a strange little flip in her chest. "I would like that very much." Ethan's smile transformed his face, lighting it up with genuine joy. "Then I will see you soon, Clara Coleman." She watched him walk back to his wagon, admiring the confident way he moved, the straightness of his shoulders, the tilt of his head. When he drove away, he looked back once and raised his hand in farewell, and Clara waved back, feeling something bright and new blooming in her chest. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Clara scrubbed the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized her teaching materials, and planned lessons for students whose abilities she could only guess at. She met some of the families whose children would be attending, trying to remember names and faces and get a sense of what she was working with. The community was wary of her at first. She was an outsider, and worse, she was an educated Eastern woman who might have fancy ideas above her station. But Clara worked to prove herself, helping where she could, never putting on airs, showing genuine interest in the people and their lives. Gradually, the suspicion began to thaw. Ethan came to town twice during those weeks, officially for supplies but finding excuses to stop by the schoolhouse both times. They would sit on the front steps in the evening, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and opinions and dreams. Clara found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his wagon, feeling her heart lift when he appeared. On his second visit, he brought her a gift. A small wooden box beautifully carved with a pattern of flowers and leaves. "I made it for you," he said, looking shy in a way that made him seem younger. "I thought you could keep your personal things in it. I know the room at the schoolhouse does not have much storage." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. "You made this." "It is beautiful, Ethan. I like to work with wood when I have time. It is peaceful carving, lets my mind settle after a long day. I love it, thank you." She looked up at him, struck by the thoughtfulness of the gift, the care that had gone into its making. "No one has ever made something for me before." "Then they were all fools," Ethan said quietly. That night, after he had gone back to the ranch, Clara lay in her narrow bed holding the carved box and thinking about the man who had made it for her. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt natural, inevitable, like water finding its way downhill. Of course she was falling in love with Ethan Oakes. How could she not? He was kind and capable, thoughtful and strong. A man who carved beautiful things with his hands and looked at her like she mattered. School began on a crisp September morning that hinted at the fall to come. 23 children showed up, ranging from tiny 6-year-olds to lanky 15-year-olds who were nearly as tall as Clara herself. She stood in front of them, her heart pounding, and introduced herself. "My name is Miss Coleman. I am from Missouri originally, and I am very happy to be here in Loveland to be your teacher. I know some of you may be wondering what to expect, so let me tell you this. I believe every person in this room is capable of learning. I believe education is the key to opportunity. And I believe we can make this a good year if we all work together with respect and effort. Are there any questions?" A hand went up in the back. One of the older boys, square-jawed and sullen-looking. "Can you spell?" "Yes, I can spell." "Can you do sums?" "Yes, I can do sums." "Can you control this classroom?" It was a challenge, and every student in the room knew it. The boy was testing her, seeing if she would fold under pressure. Clara looked him directly in the eye and did not blink. "I can do my job. The question is, can you do yours? Your job is to be a student. That means showing up, paying attention, and trying your best. If you can do that, we will get along fine. If you cannot, you and I will have a different kind of conversation. Do you understand?" The boy stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, madam. Good. What is your name?" "Henry Wilson, madam." "Well, Henry Wilson, I look forward to seeing what you can accomplish this year." The tension in the room broke, and Clara felt the shift. She had passed the first test. The rest would depend on whether she could back up her words with action, but she had made a start. Teaching turned out to be the hardest and most rewarding work Clara had ever done. The children came with wildly different levels of knowledge and ability. Some could barely read, while others devoured any book she put in front of them. Some were naturally quick with numbers, while others struggled to understand even basic arithmetic. And all of them had responsibilities at home that sometimes kept them from school. Younger siblings to watch, animals to tend, chores that could not wait. But Clara threw herself into the work with passion. She stayed up late planning lessons that would engage students at different levels. She invented games to make learning fun. She brought in real-world examples that connected to the students' lives. And slowly, gradually, she saw progress. Children who had been resistant began to participate. Students who had struggled began to understand. The schoolhouse became a place of energy and discovery. Ethan came to town every week now, always finding a reason to visit Clara. Sometimes he brought gifts, vegetables from his garden, a book he thought she might like. once a beautiful shawl he had bought from a peddler who passed through. Sometimes he simply came to talk, and they would walk together through the town or sit on the schoolhouse steps as evening fell. Their feelings for each other deepened and intensified with each meeting. They held hands now when they walked. They sat close together when they talked. Once, when Ethan arrived to find Clara crying in frustration over a lesson that had gone badly, he pulled her into his arms and simply held her until the tears stopped. And Clara felt safer in that embrace than she had felt anywhere since her parents died. But neither of them spoke the words that hovered between them. Neither said, "I love you," though it was written in every glance, every touch, every moment they spent together. Clara told herself it was too soon, they needed more time, she had to be certain. But the truth was, she was afraid. Afraid of losing her independence, afraid of being hurt, afraid that the happiness she felt was too fragile to trust. October brought cooler weather and the roundup Ethan had been preparing for. Clara did not see him for 2 weeks while he and his men gathered and sorted the cattle. She was surprised by how much she missed him, how empty the days felt without the possibility of his arrival. When he finally came back to town, looking exhausted and battered but satisfied, she had to restrain herself from running into his arms in the middle of the street. It went well, she asked as they sat together on the schoolhouse steps in the late afternoon sun. Very well. We have 40 head ready for market. That is our best year yet. I will be taking them to Denver in a few weeks. The money from that sale will see the ranch through winter and then some. You must be proud. I am. It is hard work building something from nothing, but when it starts to work, when you see the results of all that effort and planning and hope, it feels worth it. Clara understood completely. That was exactly how she felt when a student finally grasped a concept they had been struggling with, or when she saw a child who hated reading suddenly get lost in a book. I know what you mean. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression serious. Clara, I need to ask you something. What is it? Will you come to the ranch for Sunday dinner? Mrs. Gilbert has been asking to see you, and I would like you to meet the men who work for me. They are like family to me, and I want them to know you. He paused, then added, I want you to know them too. I want you to see my life, all of it, not just the parts I bring to town. Clara's heart raced. This felt like a significant step, a deepening of their relationship into something more serious and intentional. I would love to come to dinner. Relief and joy washed over Ethan's face. Sunday, then. I will come get you in the morning and we can make a day of it. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the October sky a perfect blue. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, the dark blue one her mother had made. She pinned up her hair and tried to calm her nerves. This mattered. This was important. She was not just visiting his ranch. She was being introduced to his family, such as it was. Ethan arrived promptly at 9, and Clara was charmed to see that he had clearly made an effort with his appearance as well. He wore clean clothes, his hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved. He looked young and nervous and impossibly handsome. The ride to the ranch was pleasant, filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. The landscape had begun to change with the season, the grass turning golden brown and the cottonwoods showing hints of yellow. The air smelled of autumn, that particular scent of earth and cooling weather that made Clara think of new beginnings. At the ranch, Mrs. Gilbert greeted Clara with a warm embrace, exclaiming over how well she looked and demanding to hear all about her teaching. The men gathered for the dinner were a varied group. Jack Morris, the foreman, whom Clara had met before, plus 4 other ranch hands ranging in age from 18 to 50. They were rough men, weathered by hard work and harder conditions, but they were respectful and welcoming, clearly following Ethan's lead in treating Clara as someone important. Dinner was a boisterous affair, with conversation flowing freely and much laughter. The men told stories about the roundup, embellishing for comic effect, and Clara found herself relaxing into the warmth of their company. This was what family felt like, she realized. Not the stiff formality of her uncle's house, but this easy camaraderie, this sense of belonging without pretense. After dinner, Ethan offered to show Clara around the ranch properly. They walked together through the barn, where Clara admired the horses and met the barn cats who lived there in exchange for keeping down the mouse population. They visited the chicken coop, where hens clucked contentedly in the sunshine. They climbed to the top of a small rise that gave a view of the entire ranch spread out below, with the mountains rising beyond. "This is what I wanted you to see," Ethan said quietly. "This is what I am building. It is not grand, but it is mine. Well, mostly mine. I still owe the bank for part of the land, but I am paying it off steadily. In another 3 years it will be completely mine, free and clear." "It is beautiful," Clara said honestly. "You should be proud of what you have accomplished." Ethan turned to face her, his expression intense. "Clara, I need to tell you something. I need to say it plainly because I am not good at talking around things and I think you deserve honesty." Clara's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." "I might already be in love with you, fully and completely. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you came here to be independent, not to fall into another relationship that might constrain you. But I had to tell you. I had to be honest about what I feel." Joy and terror warred in Clara's chest. "Ethan, Wait, let me finish. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. I know it is too soon. But I am asking if you feel anything similar. Because if you do, if there is any chance you might come to love me too, then I want to court you properly. I want to see where this might go. But if you do not feel that way, if you want to keep things as they are, or if you want me to step back, I need to know. I need to know if I should hope." Clara looked up at him, at his face so earnest and vulnerable, and felt her fear begin to dissolve. She had come west to escape a loveless marriage, yes, but that did not mean she had to be alone forever. And what she felt for Ethan was nothing like what Martin had demanded of her. This was mutual, respectful, joyful. This was what love should be. "I am falling in love with you too," Clara said, and watched his face transform with happiness. "I did not expect it, and part of me is terrified, but it is true. When you are not here, I miss you. When you are here, I feel complete in a way I never have before. I do not know what that means for my independence or my teaching or any of the plans I made, but I know I do not want to lie and say I do not feel what I feel." Ethan reached out and took her hands in his grip warm and strong. "You would not have to give up anything. Your teaching matters to you, so it matters to me. Your independence matters to you, so it matters to me. I do not want to own you, Clara. I want to stand beside you. I want to build a life with you where we both have room to be ourselves." "Is that possible?" Clara whispered. "Can two people really build a life together without one having to sacrifice everything?" "I do not know," Ethan admitted, "but I would like to try, with you, if you are willing." Clara squeezed his hands, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I am willing." Ethan pulled her close and kissed her, a gentle kiss full of promise and hope. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling like she was finally, fully home. They courted through the fall and into winter, a courtship conducted in stolen moments between Clara's teaching and Ethan's ranch work. He came to town whenever he could, and she visited the ranch on Sundays when weather permitted. They wrote letters when they could not see each other, long letters full of daily details and deeper thoughts. Clara kept those letters in the carved box Ethan had made for her, reading and rereading them until she had parts memorized. The town watched their courtship with interest. Some approved, seeing Ethan as a good man who could provide well for a wife. Others worried that Clara would leave her teaching position to marry, and then they would have to find another teacher. Still others gossiped about impropriety, though there was nothing improper about their relationship. They were always chaperoned when at the ranch, and in town they were in full view of anyone who cared to look. Clara found she did not care what the gossip said. She was happy, genuinely happy, in a way she had not been since before her parents died. Her teaching brought her satisfaction and purpose. Her relationship with Ethan brought her joy and companionship. She felt like she was building the life she had always wanted but never quite believed possible. Winter came hard to Colorado that year, with snow falling heavy and often. Travel became difficult, and Clara saw less of Ethan than either of them would have liked. But they made the best of it, and when they did see each other, the joy of reunion made the separation worthwhile. It was a particularly cold day in January when Clara noticed the tear in her winter coat. The fabric had snagged on something sharp and ripped along the seam, a tear that would let in cold air and snow. She stared at it with dismay, knowing she needed to mend it but having no idea how. Her attempts at sewing had always been disasters, with stitches that pulled loose and seams that puckered unevenly. She was still frowning at the tear when Ethan arrived unexpectedly, having braved the snowy roads to bring her supplies. He took one look at her face and asked what was wrong. "My coat is torn," Clara said, feeling embarrassed by how upset she was over something so small. "And I cannot sew to save my life. I have tried and tried, but my stitches always come out wrong." She expected him to offer to have Mrs. Gilbert mend it or to suggest she find someone in town who could help. Instead, Ethan started to laugh, a warm sound that filled the small room. "What is funny about this?" Clara demanded. "I am sorry," Ethan said, still chuckling. "It is just that I cannot sew either. Never could, never will be able to. I have a pile of clothes at the ranch with rips and tears I keep meaning to have Mrs. Gilbert fix. We are quite a pair, you and I." Clara felt her frustration dissolve into reluctant amusement. "We are rather useless at domestic skills, are we not?" "Completely useless. Good thing we have other talents." Ethan examined the coat, then shrugged. "Well, if neither of us can sew, then we will just have to wear what we have, torn or not, or we will have to beg Mrs. Gilbert's help more often." "I cannot sew," Clara admitted, hearing the resignation in her own voice. "I cannot cook very well either. I can bake bread that is edible, but anything more complicated than that usually ends in disaster. I am hopeless at knitting. I do not know how to preserve food properly or make soap or do any of the things a proper Western woman should know how to do." Ethan took her hands, his expression gentle. "Clara, I do not need you to be a proper Western woman, whatever that means. I need you to be yourself. The woman who stands up to difficult students and teaches Latin to farmers' children. The woman who came west alone because she refused to accept what others planned for her. The woman I love." Clara's breath caught. "You love me." "I love you," Ethan confirmed. "I have loved you since you told me you would rather be alone than with the wrong person. Since you faced down Mrs. Dalton without flinching. Since I saw you reading by lamplight with your hair down and realized I wanted to see that sight every night for the rest of my life. I love you, Clara Coleman, torn coats and terrible sewing and all." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, happy tears this time. "I love you too, Ethan Oakes. I love your kindness and your steadiness. I love the way you see me as I am and do not want me to be something different. I love the way you make me laugh and the way you hold me when I cry. I love you completely." Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Clara kissed him back with all the love and hope in her heart. When they finally broke apart, Both were breathing hard, and Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said softly. "I know I said I would not ask yet, but I cannot wait any more. Marry me, Clara. Be my wife. We will figure out the details, the sewing and cooking and all the rest. But please say you will spend your life with me." Clara pulled back enough to look into his eyes, those hazel eyes she had grown to love so well. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place on a bright day in March when the worst of winter had passed, but spring had not yet fully arrived. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Gilbert had made for her, insisting it was a gift and refusing any payment. Ethan wore his best suit, looking almost uncomfortable in the formal clothing but so handsome that Clara's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the church. The whole town turned out for the ceremony. Mrs. Dalton was there, looking satisfied, as if she had known all along this would happen. The ranch hands came in their cleanest clothes, clearly uncomfortable in the church, but determined to support their boss. Clara's students attended with their families, excited to see their teacher getting married. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They exchanged vows in the small church, promising to love and honor each other, to support and cherish each other, through all the joys and trials life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Clara sweetly, and the congregation applauded. The reception was held at the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food brought by seemingly everyone in town. There was music and dancing, and Clara found herself passed from partner to partner as Ethan's friends and neighbors welcomed her into the community as one of their own. Late in the afternoon, they slipped away to begin the journey back to the ranch. Clara had agreed to continue teaching through the end of the school year in May, so they would split their time between the ranch and the schoolhouse for the next few months. But for tonight, and for the next week, they would be at the ranch, alone together as husband and wife. The sun was setting as they arrived home, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon and then, to her surprise and delight, swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold of the house. "I am your wife now," Clara said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What happens next?" "Whatever we want," Ethan replied. "We make our own rules, remember?" He carried her upstairs to the bedroom they would now share, and Clara felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. But as Ethan set her down and began to slowly unpin her hair, his touch gentle and reverent, the nervousness faded. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. They made love slowly that first time, learning each other's bodies with wonder and care. Ethan was patient and attentive, making sure Clara felt safe and cherished. And Clara discovered that physical intimacy with someone you truly loved was nothing like the clinical, distasteful thing she had imagined it must be with Martin Weatherby. This was beautiful and connecting and joyful, a celebration of their love made tangible. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Clara's head on Ethan's chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. She traced patterns on his skin with her fingertips, marveling that this strong, good man was now her husband. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Neither did I. I thought maybe happiness was not in the cards for me. That I would have the ranch and that would be enough. But then you rolled into my life in a cloud of dust with a broken wagon, and everything changed." "Best broken wagon ever," Clara said, and felt Ethan's chest shake with laughter beneath her cheek. They spent the next week in a blissful cocoon, rarely leaving the ranch, focused entirely on each other. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears. They made love frequently, growing more comfortable and adventurous with each other. They took long walks around the property, Ethan showing Clara every corner of the ranch and sharing his plans for its future. Their future. Mrs. Gilbert gave them privacy, appearing only to leave food on the porch and then disappearing again with a knowing smile. The ranch hands managed the daily work without needing Ethan's constant oversight, allowing him these days to focus on his new bride. But all too soon, the week was over and reality returned. Clara had to go back to her students, and Ethan had to return to running the ranch. They worked out a system. Clara would stay in the schoolhouse Sunday evening through Friday afternoon, and Ethan would come fetch her Friday after school let out. They would spend Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning together at the ranch before the cycle began again. It was not ideal, but it worked. Clara threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, determined to finish the school year strong. Her students noticed something different about their teacher, a lightness and joy that had not been there before. They teased her gently about being a married lady now, and Clara took it in good humor. Ethan managed the ranch with his usual competence, but everyone noticed he was distracted on the days Clara was gone. He made the trip into town more often than strictly necessary, always finding some excuse to stop by the schoolhouse for a quick visit with his wife. Jack Morris teased him mercilessly about being besotted, and Ethan did not even try to deny it. The school year ended in late May with a small celebration. Parents came to see their children perform recitations and display their work from the year. Clara was proud of what her students had accomplished, and several parents made a point of telling her they hoped she would continue teaching next year despite being married now. That evening, Clara moved out of the schoolhouse for the last time, packing up her belongings to move permanently to the ranch. It felt strange to leave this little room that had been her first true home in Colorado, but she was ready. Ready to start her married life properly, ready to be with Ethan every day instead of just on weekends. The summer was glorious. Clara discovered she loved ranch life more than she had expected. She helped Mrs. Gilbert in the garden, learning to grow vegetables in the challenging Colorado climate. She learned to ride better, and she and Ethan would go out together in the evenings, riding across their land as the sun set and the air cooled. She spent time in the barn with the horses, developing a particular fondness for a young filly that Ethan said she could train as her own. She did not learn to sew, but Mrs. Gilbert was patient about mending their clothes, and Clara found other ways to contribute. She took over the ranch bookkeeping, organizing Ethan's somewhat chaotic records into a proper accounting system. She helped with correspondence, writing letters to buyers and suppliers in a clear hand. She read aloud in the evenings to whoever was around, sharing books from her collection with men who had little access to literature otherwise. By the end of summer, Clara felt fully integrated into the rhythm of ranch life. She was no longer an Eastern school teacher playing at being a rancher's wife. She was simply herself, Clara Oakes, wife and teacher and valued member of a working ranch. The school board approached her in August about continuing to teach, but they were willing to be flexible about her married status. Could she perhaps teach just 3 days a week instead of 5? Or could she teach in the mornings only, returning to the ranch each afternoon? Clara was torn. She loved teaching, but she also loved her life at the ranch. She did not want to go back to spending weekdays apart from Ethan. In the end, they worked out a compromise. Clara would teach 3 days a week, Monday through Wednesday. The school board would hire an assistant teacher for Thursday and Friday. It was not ideal for anyone, but it meant Clara could keep teaching without sacrificing her marriage. That fall, Clara settled into her new schedule. She stayed at the ranch Sunday through Monday morning, then Ethan would take her into town. She would teach Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, staying at the schoolhouse those nights. Wednesday evening after school, Ethan would come collect her, and they would return to the ranch for the rest of the week. It was complicated, but it worked for them. The first hint that Clara might be pregnant came in November. She missed her monthly courses and felt queasy in the mornings. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes until she was certain. But when a second month passed the same way, she could no longer deny what her body was telling her. She told Ethan on a cold December evening as they sat by the fire after dinner, "I think I am going to have a baby." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming into outright joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby, I think so. I am almost certain." Ethan whooped with happiness and pulled Clara into a tight embrace, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. Mrs. Gilbert, hearing the commotion, came running from the kitchen to find out what was happening. And when she learned the news, she cried happy tears and immediately began planning for the new arrival. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from severe nausea through the first few months, and she was exhausted all the time. Teaching became more difficult as her body changed and fatigue overwhelmed her. By February, she made the difficult decision to stop teaching entirely until after the baby was born. The school board was disappointed but understanding, and they promised to hold a position for her when she was ready to return. Clara spent the rest of winter at the ranch, resting and preparing for the baby. Mrs. Gilbert took charge of making baby clothes and blankets, her skilled needle doing what Clara's never could. The ranch hands all pitched in to help prepare a nursery, converting a small room next to the main bedroom into a bright space for the new baby. Ethan was attentive and protective, hovering over Clara to the point where she sometimes wanted to shoo him away just to have space to breathe. But she also found his concern endearing, a sign of how much he loved her and how much he already loved their unborn child. The baby came in late April, after a long and difficult labor that scared Ethan half to death. The doctor and Mrs. Gilbert attended Clara while Ethan paced in the room below, unable to sit still or think about anything except what was happening upstairs. When he finally heard the sound of a baby crying, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Gilbert appeared at the top of the stairs with a broad smile. "You have a son, Ethan, a healthy boy, and Clara is tired but fine." Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Clara exhausted and sweaty but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with so much love and happiness that he felt his eyes fill with tears. "Meet your son," she said softly. Ethan approached carefully and looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. His son. His and Clara's son. He reached out with one finger to touch the impossibly small hand, and the baby's fingers wrapped around his finger with a surprisingly strong grip. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at her son's face, Clara knew. "James, after my father. James Ethan Oakes, James," Ethan repeated, trying it out. "I like it. James Oakes. Welcome to the world, son." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. James was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and cried often, but he was theirs, and Clara and Ethan loved him fiercely. They took turns walking him at night when he would not settle. They marveled over every small change and development. They worried constantly that they were doing something wrong, but somehow James thrived anyway. By summer, life had found a new rhythm. Clara had not returned to teaching, finding that she had no desire to leave James even for a few hours. let alone days at a time. To her surprise, she did not miss it as much as she thought she would. She found that motherhood brought its own satisfactions, its own sense of purpose and accomplishment. She still read voraciously and kept her mind engaged, but her priorities had shifted. The school board eventually hired a permanent replacement teacher, a young man from Kansas who was eager to prove himself. Clara felt a pang when she heard the news, but it was a small pang, easily soothed by looking at her son's face. Ethan was a devoted father, spending every moment he could with James. He would carry the baby around the ranch, showing him the horses and cattle and explaining everything as if James could understand. He sang to him, rough cowboy ballads that made Clara laugh. He changed diapers without complaint and got up for night feedings even though Clara was nursing, and there was little he could actually do to help. "You are going to spoil him," Clara said one evening, watching Ethan rock James while humming softly. "Good," Ethan replied. "He deserves to be spoiled. He deserves to know he is loved every moment of every day." As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Ethan expanded his herd and his horse breeding operation. He bought additional land, extending the ranch's borders. Money was not plentiful, but it was steady, and each year they were more secure than the year before. Clara found ways to contribute beyond bookkeeping. She started a small library in Loveland, donating many of her own books and soliciting donations from others. She organized a women's reading group that met weekly at the church. She tutored students who were struggling, offering her knowledge freely to anyone who wanted to learn. She might not be a full-time teacher anymore, but she still found ways to educate and inspire. When James was 2 years old, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She delivered a daughter in the spring, a tiny girl with dark hair and her father's hazel eyes. They named her Eleanor, after Ethan's mother who had died when he was young. Eleanor was a calmer baby than James had been, content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. James was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to help care for her, though at 2 years old his help was more hindrance than anything. Still, Clara and Ethan encouraged his gentle involvement, teaching him to be careful and kind. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. James started helping around the ranch as soon as he was able, shadowing his father and the ranch hands with determined concentration. Eleanor proved to have her mother's love of books, learning to read at a remarkably young age and always begging for just one more story. A third child arrived when James was 5. Another boy they named Thomas, who had his mother's dark hair and a mischievous streak that kept everyone on their toes. The ranch continued to prosper. Ethan's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and buyers came from as far as Denver and Colorado Springs to purchase his stock. The cattle operation expanded steadily, and Ethan was able to hire additional permanent hands, building more bunkhouses to accommodate them. What had started as a modest ranch had grown into a substantial operation, all built on Ethan's hard work and vision. Through it all, Clara and Ethan's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, as any couple did. There were stressful times when money was tight, or when the children were sick, or when work demands pulled them in different directions. But they always came back to each other, always remembered what they had built together, and why it mattered. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Clara with a gift. He led her out to the barn where a beautiful saddle waited, custom-made from the finest leather with her initials tooled into the side. "Your own saddle," Ethan said, "for your own horse. You have been using my old spare for too long. I wanted you to have something that was yours." Clara ran her hands over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It is beautiful, thank you." "That is not all," Ethan said, and led her to a stall where a gorgeous mare stood, a dark bay with intelligent eyes and perfect conformation. "She is yours, too. Her name is Willow. She is out of Apache and that black mare we bought 3 years ago. I have been training her specifically for you." Clara could not hold back her tears. "Ethan, this is too much. It is not nearly enough for everything you have given me. 10 years ago, you agreed to marry a struggling rancher who could barely keep his books straight. You have been my partner in building this life, raising our children, making this ranch into something real and lasting. You gave up your teaching, your independence, so much of what you came west for. I wanted to give you something that was just yours. A horse you can ride whenever you want, wherever you want to go. Freedom, in a way." Clara wrapped her arms around her husband's neck and kissed him deeply. "I did not give up my independence, you fool. I chose a different kind of life, that is all. And I have never regretted it, not for a single moment. You and the children, this ranch, this life we have built together, this is everything I ever wanted, even though I did not know I wanted it until I found you. You are sure. You do not miss teaching. You do not regret staying home with the children instead of keeping your career." Clara considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been if I had made different choices. But no, I do not regret it. Teaching was fulfilling, but this is fulfilling in a different way. Watching our children grow, working beside you to build something lasting, being part of this community, I have found purpose and meaning in ways I never expected. And when the children are older, who knows? Maybe I will teach again. But for now, I am exactly where I want to be." That night, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Gilbert had retired to her own cottage, Clara and Ethan sat together on the porch as they had done so many times over the years. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and prosperous. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. Horses moved like shadows in the corrals. The mountains rose dark against the star-filled sky. "You remember the day we met?" Clara asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "I remember thinking you were the most determined woman I had ever seen, standing there by your broken wagon looking like you would fight the whole territory if you had to. I remember thinking you had kind eyes and capable hands, and hoping you were not a bandit or worse." Ethan laughed. "Lucky for you, I was just a rancher who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "The perfect place at the perfect time," Clara corrected. "If my wagon had not broken down exactly where it did, we never would have met. I would have made it to Loveland, taught at the school, and probably ended up marrying some other man eventually, or staying a spinster schoolteacher forever. And I would have kept running this ranch alone, probably worked myself into an early grave, never knowing what I was missing." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, thinking about all the coincidences and choices that had brought them to this moment. A broken wagon wheel, a rancher passing by at just the right time, a woman brave enough to come west alone, a man kind enough to help a stranger. Two people who could not so admitting their inadequacy and deciding it did not matter because they had each other. "I love you," Clara said. "I loved you when I could barely admit it to myself, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that too." "I love you too," Ethan replied. "You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the best thing that ever happened to me. I would break 1,000 wagon wheels if it meant finding you again." As the years continued to pass, Clara and Ethan grew old together, watching their children become adults and start families of their own. James took over more and more of the ranch operation, proving himself as capable as his father. Eleanor became a teacher, fulfilling the dream her mother had set aside, and Clara took deep satisfaction in seeing her daughter thrive in the profession Clara had loved. Thomas proved to have a gift with horses that surpassed even his father's, and he expanded that part of the ranch's business until Oak's horses were known throughout Colorado and beyond. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Clara delighted in them all, telling them stories and teaching them to read and passing on the love of learning she had never lost. Ethan built swings and taught them to ride and spoiled them mercilessly, just as he had spoiled his own children. The ranch that had started as one man's dream became a family legacy, something that would endure for generations. The land that Ethan had worked so hard to pay off was now secured for his children and grandchildren, a foundation they could build their own dreams upon. As Clara and Ethan entered their 60s, they began to slow down, letting their children take on more responsibility while they enjoyed a quieter pace of life. They spent their days much as they had spent their courting days, talking, walking the land they loved, sitting on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. Their love had not dimmed with age but had deepened, becoming richer and more complex with every year they spent together. One evening, as they sat in their customary spot on the porch, Clara said, "I have been thinking about that first day when you found me by my broken wagon." "Oh." Ethan looked at her with interest, his hair now silver but his eyes still the same hazel she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "You saved me that day, not just from being stranded but from the life I was running from. You gave me a different path, a better one." "You saved me too," Ethan said seriously. "I was just existing before I met you, not really living. You taught me what it meant to share my life with someone, to build something together that was bigger and better than anything I could have built alone. You made me better than I was." "We made each other better," Clara said. "That is what love does, I think. It does not complete you like the poets say. You were already complete. But it adds something new, something you did not know you were missing until you found it." They rocked in comfortable silence, hands entwined, thinking about the life they had built together from that chance meeting on a dusty Colorado road. A life built not on grand gestures or perfect moments, but on daily choices to love and support and stand by each other. A life built on acceptance of each other's flaws and celebration of each other's strengths. A life built on the simple truth that two people who could not sew had decided to wear what they had and make it work, and in doing so had made something beautiful. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied. The sounds of the ranch settling in for the night created a familiar symphony. Clara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat together as darkness fell, and the stars emerged one by one. This was their legacy. Not just the ranch or the children or the life they had built, but the love that had made it all possible. A love that had started with a broken wagon and a kind gesture, and had grown into something that would endure long after they were gone, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward into the future. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they rose together and went inside, still holding hands as they had done for more than 40 years. They climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared since their wedding night, and they lay down together in the comfortable bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "Thank you," Clara whispered in the darkness. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For being exactly who you are, for loving me as I am. For building this life with me, for everything." "Thank you too," Ethan replied, kissing the top of her head. "For saying yes. For taking a chance on a struggling rancher. For being my partner in every sense of the word. For giving me the best life I could have imagined." They fell asleep that way, wrapped together, safe in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together as they had faced everything for more than 40 years. Two people who had each come to Colorado territory looking for something they could not quite name and who had found it in each other. The ranch would endure. Their children would thrive. Their love would echo through generations. And it had all started with a broken wagon wheel, a chance meeting, and two people brave enough to admit their limitations and love each other anyway. Two people who could not so, but who had woven together a life more beautiful than any tapestry, made of honesty and acceptance and the deep, abiding love that comes from truly knowing another person and choosing them every single day. This was their happily ever after. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and true and completely theirs. And as they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, they knew without question that they would do it all again, broken wagon and all, because every moment had led them to this. A life well lived, a love well earned, and a happiness that would endure long after they were gone.